Okay, we can start. Buenos dias, good morning everyone. Welcome back to our Friday seminars. And today we have the pleasure to present Andrea Santangeli, who you already know, I think. He is in the ecology and animal demography and ecology group. And he recently gave a plenary at the Italian Ornithological Conference. And today he will give us a sneak peek on that presentation about biodiversity and conservation of birds.
Thank you, Sophia. It's a pleasure to be here talking, and just to reassure you, it's not going to be a plenary of 1 hour, so you can go and work in a bit. So this is the content. We are going to look at global change very briefly, some threats to birds. This is about birds, avian biodiversity at the global level. Then we look at emerging threats, which is the part that I'm really into it at the moment, especially at the global level. We will see some examples with solar photovoltaic expansion and birds, and then some solutions, especially focusing on new technologies like this GPS tracking. And I will show some real examples how we use this and how we leverage this kind of technologies to help mitigate an important threat for vultures in Africa. So I guess you understand probably what this elephant in the room refers to in this initial slide. When we talk about global change, it's us. It's our global population. It's increasing all the time. We are now over 9 billion. And all the projections, although they kind of show a potential decline in the rate of increase and eventually a drop in the world population of humans, we are still going to increase in the next decades or so. And this is, of course, why this is a problem. It's a problem because the society needs food, needs water, needs energy, minerals and metals and fuel. And of course, we need nature, the so-called ecosystem services. I'm sure many of you are studying those. So the problem is to reconcile all these resources and resource needs and pressures that the society needs, and at the same time ensure that we conserve nature. And if we look at the picture globally, using, for example, this Stockholm resilience kind of assessments, we see that the situation in 2009, it was kind of as such. So out of 7 boundaries that were assessed at the global level, these are planetary boundaries. It means that if we cross these boundaries, there will be some unpredictable consequences. And so we can see that 3 of them were crossed, specifically biosphere integrity, which means basically biodiversity conservation, species decline, and also ecosystem functions and services. And there are others, of course, like climate change and so on. And this is the situation just 2 years ago. They reassessed these boundaries, and out of 9, 7 have been crossed already. Including, for example, these that includes novel entities, refers to microplastics and other heavy metals that we tend to produce and to pollute, for example, the ocean or the land. So, of course, if we think about this situation, it's not really very bright and very promising. And of course, this all has an impacts on the terrestrial areas of the world. I'm really sorry that I'm not talking about the marine environment here so much. I like to stay with the feet on the ground. So I don't really do much research in the marine area. But we can see here, for example, this is a human footprint map, which shows in red the areas that are mostly impacted by human pressures of different drivers, like agriculture, logging, infrastructure development, and so on. And we can see that some areas are really like quite heavily impacted already in 2001. And if we look just in 2020, of course, areas that were red, they became even more red. Areas that were yellow, they became more orange, and so on. So the impact is spreading across the world. There are almost no intact areas nowadays left on Earth, besides some really remote areas where we really don't have access to, and we cannot really impact them. And of course, all these changes and these impacts, they of course exert a huge pressure on biodiversity, in this case in birds. We know, for example, that out of the more than 1,000, almost 11,000 species of birds, 13% or a bit more are endangered according to the IUCN Red List. So it means that they have been classified as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. And this is an interesting figure, which shows basically the decline, as we would expect, on this of the status of the global bird species. It captures, basically, it's an index, the Red List index, that captures the balance between threatened and non-threatened species. So the more it goes down and the more the threatened species increase compared to the non-threatened species. Means that a lot of species become more and more endangered. And this is what is happening. And these are just few examples of those. And the main reasons for these declines, for those of you who are not aware about birds and threats, are mostly agriculture and biological resource use. Biological resource use is mainly due to logging, forest cutting, and also especially in the tropical regions of the world, and also hunting and trapping of birds in most of the areas. We are talking nowadays very openly about defaunation of avian or biodiversity, because there are still habitats that are potentially there, but there is nothing inside, no animals, mostly because they've been hunted out until basically it has been emptied. And of course, agriculture, modern agriculture with mechanized practices that can cover basically entire areas with tractors and so on, cause a lot of troubles for birds, including also the homogenization of the landscape in agricultural lands and the use of pesticides and fertilizers that of course pollute the environment and also reduce the prey base for birds, which a lot of them feed on insects. There are also other threats here, which affect a smaller number of birds, as you can see here. But this one, somehow, it hasn't been really much addressed, like I would say, like it deserves. It's a growing threat, and I would call it an emerging threat for birds. So I've been dedicating the past 2 years working at least partly on this issue, because I think it's very relevant. For example, in the past 20 years, we have seen a growth of wind energy, and we have realized the consequences on especially raptors, vultures, far too late in terms of mortality of these individuals colliding with the wind turbines. And then we had to readjust the things. And I think this is what's happening now, the same thing with solar photovoltaic. Due to all this kind of, including the war in Ukraine and the need for energetic independence of the countries, there is a strong push towards renewable energies. And you can see here, these are small scale, the red dots, and the blue are the large scale solar photovoltaic plants that are existing nowadays. So you can see that the world is getting full of them, especially in some countries. And so nobody has really looked at the global level, how can this potentially impact birds, and also how can these impacts manifest in the near future when these plants, solar photovoltaic plants, will eventually expand even more. So basically, in the field of conservation science and in society in general, I think that we have two big issues and two big challenges. One is the one of protecting biodiversity, conserving biodiversity, and we have some international agreements on place. For example, the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework states that we should put under protection at least 30% of the terrestrial areas of the world by the year 2030, basically in 5 years. And you can see this is the level of protection of the terrestrial areas at the moment. We need to double this in 5 years. So it's really, in a way, it's really important to identify. It will probably never be realized, the 30% in 2030, but at least it's important to identify the areas which we need to protect. that are most important for biodiversity to protect in the near future. On the other hand, we have this challenge, and this is massive. We need to produce energy. We are facing this energy revolution in a way that we are leaving fossil fuels to go towards more kind of sustainable, renewable energies like solar photovoltaic. And this is a projection from a paper in 2023 showing basically the increase in solar photovoltaic in the near future. This is just up to 2060. So it's just around the corner. Compared to any other energy source, you can see that, for example, coal, fossil fuels in general are going to decline. So this threat is going to be, or this progression is going to happen in a way or another at different levels. And I'm saying that because there is also kind of economics behind this. And the economics is this, that when you look at the cost of each of these energy sources in the near future, 2020, 2023, okay, now, then 2027, 2030, you can see that pretty much around all the world, solar photovoltaic will be the cheapest energy source. Of course, it doesn't mean that every country will go for solar photovoltaic, but it will be very appealing for companies to invest in that. So there will be for sure an expansion, even if it's not according to these projections. So basically, the study question here was to look at and identify the conflict areas between areas that are important for birds and areas that are also going to be developed for solar photovoltaic. So this kind of spatial overlaps. And also understand a little bit how potential expansion of solar photovoltaic will erode the distribution of the world birds across more or less 10,000 species. And we did that, as I anticipated, with distribution data, habitats, areas of habitat. So these are kind of polygons that have been refined within according to the suitable habitat for each single species. And we had about 10,500 species, which we grouped then also in classes that are more relevant to solar photovoltaic, which is, of course, an energy and a deployment that is going to be using mostly open areas. So we were interested also in grassland birds, ground nesting birds, and desert birds. And then we use a conservation planning tool, whose details I'm not going to very much kind of explain here because it's a bit complicated. But basically, we integrated them with solar photovoltaic expansion maps. These solar photovoltaic potential expansion maps consider not only the solar irradiation that comes to the surface of the land, but also to logistic constraints, like, for example, accessibility, demand, land cover, and so on, and distance to the electricity grid. And here you can see an example of the areas in red, which are the ones that are most likely to be developed in the near future. So we did this exercise across all the birds of the world, and basically what we did, we basically looked at as I said before in question one, look at the conflicts, which in this case, we have the birds priority areas in blue tone and solar photovoltaic in kind of yellow orangish tone. And the black areas are the ones where they overlap. So they are important areas for bird conservation globally, but also for solar photovoltaic expansion. So here is where we would expect major conflicts between these two objectives, energy production and bird conservation. And we see that some countries will have a lot of these conflicts. Specifically, for example, Brazil, India, you can see here, everything is black in India. United States, a lot of areas, Australia, Mexico, South Africa, and so on. So there are very many countries that will have very large areas which will entail conflicts. So these countries will have to somehow manage between these objectives of protecting biodiversity, birds in this case, versus pushing solar photovoltaic. The situation is more or less similar for grassland birds, which are the ones that, of course, will probably be most affected because they share the same habitat that is developed for solar photovoltaic. And we can see here, most of the largest grassland areas of the world will be kind of under potential conflict. Similar situation for the ground nesting birds, more or less the same areas. And then, of course, for the desert birds, we have in the major deserts, of course, of the world, we have potential conflicts. Here, I just mentioned that there is not the Arizona desert here, and this is because when we selected the species pool for these desert birds, we used a database that didn't include any of the didn't classify any of these kind of Arizona area species as strictly desert. So these were 70 species, which were really strictly desert species. Just to keep the kind of the results a bit clear and not confusing. What we did then, we took at the global level, we took all those conflict areas and we saw how potentially they could be covered at the moment by protected areas. And we separated the protected areas by the categories of the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, into protected areas from categories 1 to 4, because these are the most strictly protected areas that would allow resisting infrastructure development. And infrastructure development also includes solar photovoltaic. So these are the ones that would buffer the impact of solar photovoltaic if they are in place. And you can see that actually only 8% of these conflict areas, this black area here, they are protected under the strict protection. And only 20% are in general across the world of these conflict areas, they are actually protected by any type of protected area. So you can see that basically that means that these areas are mostly vulnerable to being destroyed or developed for solar photovoltaic in the near future. Then we went to question 2, which was basically understand the potential distribution loss by each species. And here I schematize a little bit the approach that we took. So we had, let's say these are 3, but in general we had 10,500 species more or less. And if you have the distribution of them, like in this case of these 3 species, you have areas of overlap. These are the best areas to place a protected area, right? Because with the same area, you can protect the distribution of 3 species. And this is, for example, in the case of this, we can select this area, and this is, for example, the coverage of this species. Without going to the details, but we can think, okay, in the future, this area is very important for solar photovoltaic. We destroy it. It goes out of question for bird conservation. We can't protect it anymore. It's out. So what happens then? We need to relocate this kind of 30% area. And this is what happens. We need to relocate it outside, for example, of this, without including this kind of synergistic area here where all the 3 overlap. So it means a loss in efficiency in protecting the distribution of the species with the same amount of area. So this exercise we did across all the species to quantify basically each species loss by sparing land for solar photovoltaic. And so basically here we have the protection, the proportion of the landscape protected, which basically in this case our reference is around here, 30%, and here is the average of the distribution of the birds protected, covered by this value, for example. And if we look at this, basically we tested different scenarios, but the most important is this, where you don't have any land that is spared for solar photovoltaic. So it means that you can cover basically any land of the world without any restrictions on excluding those areas. But if you exclude those important areas for photovoltaic development, which we have seen in the example before, then your distribution that you can cover by a target of 30% terrestrial land protected drops from, for example, 75% to much less. In the case of all the birds of the world, this loss is around 13%. But if we look at the other classes of species, groups of species which are sharing more the land with photovoltaic, then we see that, for example, for grassland species, this amounts to 30% distribution loss on average. For the ground nesting species, it's 28, more or less similar, and for the desert species, it's even more, over 40% loss. So that really means that we have a problem. Basically, if solar photovoltaic will be expanding as all these predictions are kind of picturing, we will have really a lot of areas that will be impacted, and a lot of species will lose large areas of their range. So basically, this is the main message out of this study. Is still kind of undergoing. I need to find time to finalize it. We jump to another section, which is a little bit related to that previous one. It's not about the threats, but it's about more solutions. We know that solutions, there are many solutions. We all know them. Transformative change, control direct pressures, protect and restore habitats, and so on. But I think that in the last like 10, 20 years, we have developed so much, society has developed so much in terms of technological innovations and so on. And we see that some of these can also help in conservation. And so they are really real solutions that we can eventually leverage to implement conservation of biodiversity. So I'm going to talk about especially this one, biologging, which is basically putting GPS tags on birds to see where they go, where they die, and then eventually understand how we can use this information for conservation. And the why I do this is because I've been working in Africa more than 10 years now, and I'm very bothered by these images. Basically, vultures mass poisoned, so large numbers of vultures being poisoned at the same carcass in one single incident. And this has happened in the last 10 years in many places in Africa, the last one being this one in Kruger National Park in South Africa. But there was this one where it was very catastrophic. It killed really a large proportion of the population of this critically endangered species called the hooded vulture. So I set up with colleagues from Germany and from Namibia to try to see if we can do something about that. And we thought about this kind of solution. So we have been already putting GPS tags on vultures with a satellite connection for many years. And we wanted to test if we can use an algorithm that directly identifies vultures with GPS by their movement that have a problem. So they go to feed at the carcass and they start to feel sick because the carcass was poisoned. If we can find and use these early signs of poisoning and send an alert to people on the ground somewhere, then these people can go quickly to decontaminate this carcass and avoid that many other vultures would get poisoned. Because this is the main problem. It's not only one incident, one poisoning event that kills one vulture or two, it's many vultures because they are foraging gregariously, they follow each other, and so it's really catastrophic. So we set out to test this system. And how we did it, we basically tagged a lot of vultures in Etosha National Park in the north of Namibia. You can kind of see here more or less. And then they were moving around. We used an algorithm, an artificial intelligence algorithm, to find clusters of carcasses, which are these black dots here. Clusters of carcasses means where the vulture is actually spending a lot of time in the same day on the same place, which indicates that there is a carcass. We validated these points on the ground, and then we used all this data to basically build a simulation. We couldn't really do this in reality, you know, artificially poisoning vultures or so on, of course. But we ran simulations. We first built this kind of models that recreate a virtual environment where virtual vultures move around, and then eventually there would be carcasses also spread randomly in the landscape, and eventually we could manipulate the number of carcasses that get poisoned in this virtual environment. I will show later how it goes. I say virtual, but actually it was fed, all these models were fed with a lot of empirical data. So we try to really closely resemble the reality to have, of course, the outcomes that could be applicable in practice. And in doing so, we used different types of foraging strategies of vultures. Sometimes they feed non-socially, sometimes they have this local enhancement. So one vulture follows another one that is approaching a carcass, and sometimes they build these chains of vultures. So basically, when they see each other approaching the carcass, they all start to congregate and start following each other at the carcass. So this is basically what it means, these chains. But we will see now in this animation of the model, for example, this is a chain of vultures. Basically, once the carcasses, which is these stars, get discovered, they become red, and then you can see the vultures approaching. So basically, what happens here, that we manipulated the number of vultures that were bearing a GPS, that are called the sentinel vultures. And when these sentinel vultures approach the poisoned carcass, then we start counting the incoming vultures after that one that come to that poisoned carcass. And these are the vultures that we could eventually potentially save if we go quickly, if we get the early alert and we go quickly to decontaminate the carcass. So we did this for different models, different scenarios, which it's a bit too much details, but first of all, we wanted to test how many vultures do you need to tag and to have as acting as sentinels in the population. Because of course, if you have a population of thousands of vultures, you can't catch and put a GPS on all of them. You need to balance. And this is what we tested here with these scenarios. So we have here the proportion of tracked vultures and the proportion of vultures that you can save using this kind of sentinels. And you can see here, okay, let's not look at this at the moment, but let's look at this shape. So you can see that the highest increase in proportion of vultures saved happens at the very beginning, when you scale up from 0 to 0.5, 0.10 percent of the population. I mean, 5 or 10% of the population. Then it starts to reach a plateau. It means that you put more GPSs, you put more money, more effort, but actually the effort doesn't really pay off much because the curves level off. Yeah, and of course, this represents the response time. Once the carcass that is poisoned is spotted and detected by the sentinel, then it starts the countdown. If you arrive there at this carcass, immediately when you get the alert, then this is the proportion of vultures that you save. This is impossible because you will never manage to get there immediately, and you never manage to get the alert in real time. It will be near real time, but not real. Then we tested, of course, all these kind of time intervals until you can get to the carcass. And basically, we saw that if you get within the 2 hours after the carcass, the poisoned carcass is spotted, you can save quite a lot of vultures already. So this is the amount. So as you know, in the global south, especially, the money and the resources for research and conservation are very limited. Well, they are limited also here, but even more there. So what happened is that money is really important. And what we did, we looked at the cost and effectiveness of these sentinel vultures. Basically, we want to know how many sentinel vultures do you have in the population, how much it costs, and what is the benefit. Because this is really what the NGOs want to know, and people that pay the money for example, sponsoring these GPSs for the vultures want to know. If I, for example, pay for 10 GPSs, how many vultures I can save? And here is the answer, basically. So the biggest, the most important relationship between cost and effectiveness is at the lower end of this proportion of vultures tracked, basically number of sentinels in the population. When you have a few, like 5%, in our case, in Namibia at least, you can basically, which entails 5%, entails 25 individuals, it costs this one, and it can potentially prevent the death of 45% of the vultures in the population. If interventions are basically implemented, put in place within 2 hours after the alert is sent. So I think that this is a really important and powerful message, especially for people that want to contribute, for example, funding, and you can tell them, okay, if you contribute this, you will contribute to save this amount of vultures. So yeah, this is basically what it tells, this figure. And my plan is now to scale this up, because we did it in Namibia with only 1 species, with a specific foraging strategy and specific accessibility and levels of poisoning. Now I want to do it across Africa with different populations where I know there is vultures with GPSs already there, and potentially also in Spain. So I think if we need to sum up all this, I think it was quite fast. We know that the world is changing and we need to do something. We can't just do business as usual. It's unacceptable at the moment. There are escalating threats, and there are especially emerging threats, which I think we are underestimating, and we need to really start addressing them before it's too late, before they become too big that we can't control anything, like it happened before. So we must really be proactive. And of course, the GPSs on the vultures show, with many other examples that are out there, that we need to really use technology to help conservation. We need to be up to date, and embrace the revolution in science and technology. And well, of course, I pictured like very negative messages there, everything, vultures dying, global change, human pressures. But actually, there are a lot of, at least in the case of birds, but I know also other taxa, there are a lot of positive cases where species have recovered from the brink of extinction. For example, the California condor, some species of albatross and shearwaters, and so on. So it's not all doom and doom. Okay, it's not all dark. If we do, and if we implement kind of evidence-based conservation actions, we can really make a difference, at least for some species. This is another study that was published recently this year, showing basically the conservation actions in place for birds, different actions here, and you can see in green the ones that have led to an improvement. So there is kind of hope that something that we do works. And with this, I would like to thank all the collaborators. Of course, this is not work that I could do alone myself. It's a shared effort. And yeah, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Andrea. Questions?
Thanks, Andrea, for the fantastic congratulations. I'm just curious, is this massive killing of vultures still going on in national park like Kruger?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
What are the park guards doing for this?
80% of them are corrupt and are kind of they do poach as well. And the ones that you can trust, they are too little to do anything. Yes. So they are trying everything. They are trying with technology, with microphones, with sentinel vultures now, but it's very hard. Yeah.
But they see the vultures as competitors for the, why?
There are 2 reasons. There is a lot of human-wildlife conflicts. So farmers, livestock farmers, aiming to kill predators like jackals, hyenas, leopards, because they kill their livestock, their cow, their sheep. And so when they find the cow or the sheep dead, half eaten by the leopard, they put the poison there. They lace it with poison because these carnivores come back the next night. And so they kill the leopard eventually. But then, of course, these carcasses are also eaten by all sorts of scavengers, including vultures. And because the vultures are so good at spotting these carcasses and at congregating on them, then of course you get these mass killings. So this is one aspect. And the other one is the poachers that intentionally wants to. So this was unintentional killing of vultures. The farmers really want to kill only the carnivores. Then there is the poachers that want to kill vultures because when they kill a rhino or an elephant, it takes like up to 2 or 3 days to actually remove the tusk or the horn. It's not really fast. So they need these days. And what happens is that as soon as you kill something, the vultures, they spot it and they start circling in the sky and going down. And the rangers know that. So they follow the vultures going down and they go to spot the poachers. So the poachers, what they do, they want to eliminate all the populations of vultures in an area so that there is no this sentinel kind of system of alert. So that's what they do. They cut the horn of the rhino and then they lace it with poison. And usually they try to do it in as remote areas as possible. And yeah, so it's a bit of a disaster in a way. You have a lot of this kind of threats, but yeah, so that's why we tested this solution, because there was one case in Namibia. It was already like more than 5 years ago in near the Botswana border in the Okavango, where there was elephant poached and killed by these poachers. And it was the tusks were removed and the elephant was left there for 2 weeks poisoned. And it killed like more than 2,000 vultures. Some of them, you know, the populations are very few, like less than 10,000 individuals left in Africa in the whole world population. So you can imagine the consequences at the population level for these species. So, but that carcass, for example, of elephant was discovered only after 2 weeks. So, you know, if you think about the 2 hours that we show there, it's already a massive improvement. And nowadays, you don't even need to go yourself. If you have the position, you can send a drone with something to at least scare off the scavengers while you make your way there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea, for the presentation. I have a question about the first part of the presentation. How is the political response of the MPA management? For example, now in Spain, there are new laws that the new buildings they have to have solar panels, and in other countries also there's a big boom of new energy use. So how you will use this data, or how is the political response? How is your connections are with the United Nations or on the international area?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really good. I think it's something that we really need to do more, this kind of more, you know, facing the policy, the international policy. So I did work before with the global level with renewable energies and biodiversity. And to be honest, my fault, I didn't really go to kind of show these results around. I don't know, it's a bit difficult. There is this barrier. What I know is that some of this work was cited and used by IPBES or by UIB-CSIC in their report. So I think that the best we can do, at least produce this science. This is the evidence. You will have a conflict there, consider it. And then, of course, it's up to them to consider these results. And of course, this is not alone. There will be more studies, of course, backing up this, and at the local level, especially national level. And then all this evidence piling up will make a strong case, I think. But I feel yeah, we should do more of this, but in practice, we are limited, time, effort, and so on. But it's a really good point. Yeah.
Very nice presentation, Andrea. I'm going to come back to the bottom. So you test this stress signal that they send to the GPS. So you did how effective it is. So you get a signal of the movement of the bottles, and then you relay that to poisoning. How effective is identifying this poisoning?
Yes, it's actually quite effective. But again, there is variation. And this is because there are different types of poisons that act immediately or with a small delay. It depends on the poisons. Usually in Africa, because they put as poisons which are very strong, like strychnine for carnivores, they kill the vultures almost immediately. And you can see that really clearly from the patterns of the GPS and the accelerometer. Accelerometer is basically it tells you the position, the relative position at the 3 dimensions of the GPS. And it's an algorithm. You can train the algorithm to with a vulture that is healthy, that is eating, and then it flies away. And then at some points you train it with a vulture that goes to the carcass, eats normally, and then after eating starts to behave very abnormally. For example, it doesn't move much. So this algorithm is actually able to pick up this kind of changes in behavior immediately after foraging and then alert you. And of course, there is a confidence level. It's from 0 to 100. So you can then decide your threshold. If you want only the top 90%, it means that you're almost sure that that vulture was really dead by poisoning. So that's how it works. It's one of these algorithms.
And then follow-up question, what is the poison that they use, and do they use a big quantity? I assume they do use big amounts. And is it possible to regulate that poison because they have to buy it somewhere? And the other one is, how realistic is this 2 hours of arriving to the?
Yeah. So the poison, it's illegal to use poison to poison carnivores. Oftentimes farmers, for example, they use these pesticides that they buy for pests, rats and insects, locusts, and they use it for poisoning the carnivores. And sometimes they have other poisons like strychnine that was used, especially in the past, especially in Africa, and they still have it, but they all use illegally and nobody is controlling. If you go to Namibia, for example, they tell you explicitly, yeah, I use poison because I have problems with the jackal, and so on. So it's very difficult to regulate. There is a lot of, there are regulations, but if there is no enforcement or some deterrence measures, I think it's going to be very difficult. The next question was
The 2 hour.
the 2 hours, yes. So I think it will be realistic, even more realistic very soon, because these technologies, these GPS technologies are advancing so fast. There are now more technologies, more satellites sent in the sky to connect basically GPSs with the stations and send these alerts quickly. Accessing these sites sometimes is difficult. In 2 hours, you don't manage. But if you get the case that, for example, instead of only one sentinel dying on the same place, you have 2 or 3, then you know that this is a big event. So maybe it's worth sending an helicopter or something. That's what they did in Kruger, actually, to get there even faster. So this is possible. That's something that I want to explore next across Africa, looking at different accessibility scenarios, because some areas are much more inaccessible than others in Africa, and of course, it's important to account for that.
I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you.